There are screams that express fear. There are screams that express anger. And then there's his scream. Fairy godparents! It is not a catchphrase. It is not a joke. It is not even a warning. It is the sound of a man whose entire nervous system has been permanently set to panic mode. Welcome to the life of Mr. Crocker, a man who wakes up every morning already losing. Not because today will be bad, but because today will confirm what he already knows. The universe is lying. Magic exists. And he is the only one being punished for noticing. In the cheerful pastel-colored nightmare of the Fairly OddParents, Crocker is presented as a joke, a twitching, shrieking lunatic who terrifies children and destroys classrooms, a villain, a punchline, a human air raid siren in khakis. But here's the problem. He's right. That's the part the show never lets you forget and never lets him survive. Crocker is not delusional. He is not imagining patterns in static. He is not inventing conspiracies to feel important. Magic is real. Fairies are real. Wishes are real. And Crocker knows this with the certainty of someone who has seen the truth and had it violently erased. Imagine living in a world where the most important thing that ever happened to you is treated as a mental illness, where every instinct you have is accurate, every conclusion is correct, and every time you open your mouth, reality itself points and laughs. That's not comedy. That's psychological water torture. Crocker does not exist in the present. He exists in a permanent echo of a moment that broke him. His eyes don't dart around the room because he's silly. They dart because he's scanning for confirmation. His voice isn't high-pitched for laughs. It's high-pitched because his body never learned how to calm down again. Most cartoon villains want power. Crocker wants validation. He doesn't want to rule the world. He wants someone, anyone, to say, "You weren't crazy, you were robbed." And every time he almost gets that proof, the universe pulls it away with surgical cruelty. So when Crocker screams, he isn't attacking children. He's begging reality to stop gaslighting him. And that's why it truly, profoundly, unfairly sucks to be Mr. Crocker. Because his life isn't built on evil. It's built on a truth no one else is allowed to remember. Mr. Crocker did not crawl out of the void screaming. That's important. Despite what his posture, voice, and blood pressure might suggest, he was not always a human embodiment of anxiety. He wasn't destined to become a walking siren of paranoia. He wasn't a destination. He was a process. At one point, unbelievably, he was just a kid, a normal one. He laughed, he smiled, he trusted the world. He lived in that brief, fragile window of childhood where the universe still feels generous. And for a while, it was, because Crocker had fairies. Not rumors, not theories, not suspicions. Actual, real, wish-granting proof that reality was softer and kinder than it pretended to be. And that's the first cruelty of his story. Crocker didn't stumble into madness. He was given paradise, taught how the rules truly worked, and then had it ripped away with surgical precision. When the fairies were taken from him, the goal wasn't just to remove magic, it was to restore order, to reset the illusion, to make sure the system stayed intact. But something went wrong. Crocker didn't forget completely. The memory wipe was sloppy, incomplete, like erasing a hard drive but leaving the folder names behind. The images vanished. The warmth disappeared. The joy was deleted, but the shape of the truth remained, burned into his instincts. So instead of forgetting magic, Crocker became haunted by it. He grew up with a hole in his mind where certainty used to live, a missing piece he could feel but never touch. Imagine knowing something important was stolen from you, but not knowing exactly what. Only that life used to make sense, and now it doesn't. That kind of loss doesn't heal, it mutates. As Crocker aged, that unresolved absence calcified into obsession. His curiosity turned into fixation. His rage turned inward, reshaping his personality around a single unanswerable question: what was taken from me? Every nervous tick, every manic theory, every shrill outburst is an aftershock of that moment. Not the loss itself, but the denial that followed. The insistence that nothing ever happened, that he imagined it, that the happiest period of his life was a delusion. That's not forgetting, that's erasure. And the most brutal part? Crocker didn't lose magic because he was irresponsible or cruel. He lost it because the universe decided he didn't deserve to remember being happy. By the time we meet him as an adult, he isn't chasing fairies for power. He's chasing them because somewhere deep inside his fractured mind, a child is still reaching out, trying to grab back the only thing that ever made the world feel safe. And the universe keeps slapping his hand away. There is something worse than forgetting the truth. It's remembering just enough of it to suffer. Mr. Crocker exists in that exact space, the psychological no man's land between certainty and insanity. He doesn't remember fairies clearly. He can't describe them with confidence. He can't replay the moments that would vindicate him. But his body remembers. His instincts remember. And that makes his life a constant state of emotional whiplash. Every time something impossible happens around him, his brain lights up like a crime scene board covered in red string. Patterns snap into place instantly. Conclusions form with terrifying speed. And he's always right. That's the joke. That's the tragedy. That's the reason his life is unbearable. Crocker doesn't chase fairies because he's desperate to believe. He chases them because he already knows. But knowledge without evidence is indistinguishable from madness. So the world treats him accordingly. From the outside, Crocker looks unhinged. A man screaming accusations at children, pointing at perfectly ordinary objects as if they're portals to another dimension. He gestures wildly, his voice cracks, his face contorts with conviction, and every single time the proof vanishes milliseconds before anyone else can see it. Not by coincidence, by design. Magic in this universe is self-correcting. It cleans up after itself. Wishes undo damage. Memories get smoothed over. Reality snaps back into shape the moment someone like Crocker gets too close to the truth. So what does that do to a person? It trains them to doubt everything except their fear. Crocker learns that calm equals ignorance, that sanity equals blindness, that if things ever seem normal, it's because something important is being hidden from him. So he stops seeking peace, he seeks confirmation, and confirmation never comes. Every failed capture, every ruined plan, every humiliating exposure reinforces the same message. You are alone in this perception. The universe will bend itself into knots before it allows you to be believed. That's why Crocker can never relax. His mind is permanently braced for impact. His eyes are always searching for glitches. His voice lives at the edge of a scream because silence feels like surrender. If he ever stops yelling, he might start forgetting. And forgetting would mean accepting that the best thing that ever happened to him was a lie. So he clings to paranoia like a life raft. He chooses obsession over emptiness, because as painful as it is to be ridiculed, it's still better than admitting that his suffering has no cause. Crocker isn't insane. He's a witness trapped in a universe that refuses to testify. At some point, misfortune stops being random. In Mr. Crocker's life, it becomes policy. Every system around him is perfectly calibrated to make sure he looks ridiculous. Not occasionally, not accidentally, consistently. The timing is always precise. The evidence always disappears at the exact wrong second. Witnesses are always distracted. Cameras malfunction. Memories blur. Reality itself plays defense. Crocker is not just ignored, he is actively undermined. The universe doesn't merely disagree with him, it stages elaborate setups to discredit him. It lets him get close enough to hope, then pulls the rug out with cruel efficiency. That kind of sustained contradiction does something horrific to a person's sense of self, because eventually you stop asking, "Why doesn't anyone believe me?" and you start asking, "What's wrong with me?" That's gaslighting at a cosmic scale. Every adult authority figure, every institution, every rule of normalcy reinforces the same lie. Crocker is unstable. Crocker is obsessed. Crocker is the problem. And the more passionately he reacts, the more this narrative seems justified. His fear becomes the proof against him. Meanwhile, the real villains remain invisible. The magical infrastructure that erased his childhood walks free, unchallenged, hidden behind cheerful aesthetics and plausible deniability. Crocker isn't fighting fairies, he's fighting denial as a law of physics. And denial always wins. What makes this especially cruel is that Crocker adapts exactly how trauma victims often do. He becomes hypervigilant, he reads into everything, he assumes deception as the default state of the world, which, in his case, is accurate. But accuracy doesn't save you when perception is controlled by forces stronger than truth. Crocker could present flawless logic, airtight arguments, mathematical certainty, and it wouldn't matter. The moment his voice rises, the moment his hands shake, he becomes easy to dismiss. The universe doesn't have to disprove him, it just has to let him react. So Crocker leans into the role assigned to him. If he's going to be labeled insane, he might as well scream. If no one will listen, he might as well be loud. The irony is brutal. The coping mechanisms he develops to survive the gaslighting are the same behaviors used to justify it. It's a closed loop, a perfect trap. And from the outside, we laugh, because the show frames this suffering as slapstick, as if the problem isn't that Crocker believes in magic, it's that he refuses to shut up about it. But imagine living in a world that resets itself every time you're about to be vindicated. Imagine knowing the truth, feeling it in your bones, and being punished every single day for refusing to forget. That's not justice. That's psychological warfare disguised as comedy. There are bad jobs. There are stressful jobs. And then there is Mr. Crocker's job. He is a school teacher, not a researcher, not a conspiracy blogger, not a recluse hiding in a basement covered in corkboards and string. He didn't isolate himself from society. Society put him in charge of children. This is where the universe really shows its sense of humor, because Crocker doesn't just suspect magic exists, he knows it does. And his workplace is a room filled every day with the exact demographic most likely to be surrounded by it. Children, careless, loud, constantly bending reality without understanding how dangerous that is. Especially one child. Timmy Turner doesn't hide magic well. He can't. Wishes leak into the environment. Logic bends. Probability collapses. Luck becomes suspiciously consistent. Any trained observer would notice the pattern within minutes. Crocker notices it instantly, and that's the nightmare. Every day, Crocker stands in front of living proof of the thing that destroyed his mind. Not once, not occasionally, daily. He watches impossibilities happen inches from his face, knowing exactly what they mean and knowing he will never be allowed to finish the sentence. Imagine being forced to professionally supervise your own trauma. Imagine trying to maintain authority, composure, and lesson plans while the universe mocks you with perfect evidence you're not allowed to keep. Crocker doesn't just teach math and history, he teaches while actively being gaslit by existence. The classroom isn't a job, it's exposure therapy with no consent and no end date. And the cruelest part, Crocker is actually good at noticing things. He's observant, detail-oriented, pattern-driven. In another life, these traits would make him a scientist, an investigator, a respected academic. Instead, they make him a joke in front of 30 children who have already been taught not to believe him. Authority means nothing when reality sabotages you in real time. So his teaching style becomes aggressive. His discipline becomes erratic. His tone becomes shrill. Not because he hates children, but because he's desperately trying to control an environment designed to unravel him. Every chalkboard is a battlefield. Every roll call is a setup. Every quiet class is a prayer. Crocker isn't failing at his job because he's incompetent. He's failing because no one can function while being psychologically hunted by their own workplace. And yet, he keeps coming back. Day after day. Because if he ever leaves, if he ever walks away, it means accepting that the truth won't be proven there either. That the last place magic might slip up is gone. So he stays. Teaching, screaming, unraveling, trapped in the most professionally humiliating position imaginable for someone who knows too much and is believed too little. At some point, trauma stops being a memory. It becomes posture. Mr. Crocker's body tells his story long before he opens his mouth. The hunched shoulders, the clenched hands, the eyes that never stop moving. He looks like a man permanently bracing for impact, because on some level, he is. His nervous system never stood down. Whatever happened to him as a child didn't just damage his mind, it rewired his physiology. He lives in a constant state of fight or flight, except there is no flight option left. So all that remains is fight. Loud, erratic, exhausting fight. That's why his voice lives in a scream, not because he wants attention, but because his body doesn't recognize calm as safe. Silence feels like danger. Stillness feels like vulnerability. If he lowers his guard for even a second, reality might sneak past him again. So he stays loud. He stays tense. He stays awake. This is what long-term psychological stress does when it's never resolved. The body becomes a surveillance system. Muscles tighten by default. Breathing shortens. Rest becomes impossible because rest requires trust, and Crocker learned very early that trust leads to loss. The cartoon exaggerates this for comedy, of course. His limbs flail, his expressions stretch beyond human limits, but exaggeration doesn't erase truth, it underlines it. Crocker doesn't look ridiculous, he looks injured. Every twitch is a reflex. Every sudden movement is a threat assessment. Every wild gesture is his body saying, "Stay alert," or it happens again. He isn't reacting to the present moment. He's reacting to the memory of being stripped of something essential and told it never existed. And the tragedy is that no amount of proof would fix this anymore. Even if someone finally believed him, even if the universe apologized, even if magic stood still long enough for him to point and say, "There," the damage is already embedded. His body has been living at maximum stress for decades. You don't undo that with validation. You don't cure that with closure. So Crocker keeps escalating, louder, faster, more extreme, not because he's getting worse, but because his system is burning out. A machine forced to run at full throttle forever doesn't fail gracefully. It shakes, it sparks, it screams. And we laugh because cartoons teach us that physical discomfort is funny when it's exaggerated enough. But beneath the slapstick is a grim reality. Crocker is exhausted in a way sleep can't fix. His body never learned how to feel safe again, and a life lived without safety doesn't just hurt, it corrodes. At some point, the question changes. It's no longer, why is Mr. Crocker like this? It becomes, why do we find this funny? Because we do. We laugh when he screams. We laugh when he's humiliated. We laugh when his plans collapse in slow motion and reality kicks him back into his place. The show invites us to. The timing is perfect. The expressions are extreme. The punishment is immediate. Pain, framed correctly, becomes entertainment. The humor works because it feels safe. Crocker is an adult. He's loud. He's antagonistic. He's coded as the villain. Laughing at him feels justified, even deserved. After all, he's the one yelling at children. He's the one breaking furniture. He's the one refusing to let things go. But that framing is doing a lot of heavy lifting because the truth is uncomfortable. Crocker isn't powerful enough to be dangerous. He doesn't control anything. He reacts. He flails. He loses over and over again. The laughter comes not from his dominance, but from his impotence. We laugh because the universe keeps winning. There's something deeply human about that. Watching someone who knows the truth fail repeatedly reassures us. It tells us the system is stable, that knowledge without permission leads nowhere, that challenging the illusion is pointless. Crocker becomes a cautionary spectacle. This is what happens when you don't move on. So the show turns his suffering into rhythm. Setup, hope, exposure, collapse, reset. It's clean, predictable, comfortable. We know he'll never win, and that's the joke. But look closer. His misery never escalates into consequence for anyone else. It never disrupts the status quo. It's self-contained, which makes it safe to consume. Crocker absorbs the pain so the world doesn't have to change. That's why we're allowed to laugh. Because if Crocker were treated seriously, the story would become disturbing. A man permanently traumatized by memory manipulation, a society that refuses to acknowledge harm because it benefits from ignorance, a system that labels the injured as unstable to avoid accountability. That's not a children's cartoon. So the laughter acts as a release valve. It keeps the tone light. It distances us from the implications. It tells us not to think too hard about what this behavior would mean in reality. But sometimes the joke slips. Sometimes Crocker's desperation feels too real, too raw, too specific. And in those moments, the humor curdles. We're no longer laughing at a villain. We're laughing at someone being crushed by an invisible machine. And that's when the question becomes harder. Are we laughing because it's funny, or because it's easier than acknowledging how cruel this actually is? By the time we reach this point, Mr. Crocker stops feeling like a character. He starts feeling like a message. Not a moral lesson in the traditional sense, not a "be kind" poster taped to the wall of a cartoon classroom. He's something colder than that, something more uncomfortable. Crocker is a warning about what happens when a system decides your experience is inconvenient. Because his greatest crime is not obsession, it's refusal. He refuses to forget. He refuses to let the truth dissolve into comfort. He refuses to accept a reality that only works if everyone agrees not to look too closely. And for that, he is punished endlessly. Crocker represents the person who saw behind the curtain too early and was never allowed to process it. The child who learned the world was mutable, negotiable, wrong, and then was told very firmly to shut up and grow up. But he never got the chance to grow up normally. That's the part that hurts the most. Crocker isn't frozen in childhood because he's immature. He's frozen there because that's where the damage happened. His emotional development stalled at the exact moment his reality was rewritten without consent. So he becomes an adult with a child's unresolved terror and an adult's responsibilities. Bills, a job, authority, expectations, all stacked on top of a psychological wound that was never acknowledged. This is why his life feels so unfair, because the world demands composure from someone it actively destabilizes. It expects professionalism from someone whose nervous system is permanently compromised. It mocks him for failing standards that were designed for people who were never erased. And still, Crocker persists. He doesn't heal, he doesn't improve, he doesn't learn a lesson. He survives in place, looping, repeating, screaming the same truth into the same void, knowing the outcome will always be the same. That's not villainy, that's endurance. Crocker becomes a living reminder that some systems don't want resolution, they want silence. They want compliance. They want people to laugh, move on, and forget the uncomfortable parts. So the show keeps him loud, keeps him grotesque, keeps him exaggerated. Because as long as he's ridiculous, he's harmless. As long as he's a joke, he can be ignored. And that's the final cruelty. Crocker doesn't exist to be redeemed. He exists to be dismissed. A man permanently trapped in the role of crazy, so no one ever has to ask whether he was right or what it cost him to be. So what have we actually learned about Mr. Crocker? Not the meme version, not the screaming caricature, not the punchline. The real one. Crocker isn't evil. He isn't power-hungry. He isn't even particularly cruel by cartoon standards. What he is permanently misaligned with the world he lives in. He knows something fundamental about reality that he is not allowed to know, and every structure around him exists to make sure that knowledge never becomes useful, respected, or healing. That's why it truly sucks to be him, because his suffering has no arc. There is no growth, no lesson learned, no closure waiting at the end of the season. Crocker doesn't improve because improvement would require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would expose the system that broke him in the first place. So instead, he loops. He wakes up tense. He goes to work already screaming. He notices the truth. He gets close. He's humiliated. He's dismissed. He resets. Over and over again. That's not a character flaw. That's a sentence. Crocker lives in a universe where being right is the worst possible outcome, where truth doesn't liberate, it isolates, where sanity is defined not by accuracy, but how well you play along with the lie everyone else agrees to maintain. And the most brutal irony? If Crocker ever did stop screaming, if he ever calmed down, if he ever accepted that magic wasn't real, that wouldn't be healing. That would be defeat. It would mean the universe finally won. It would mean the erasure was complete, the last echo of the truth smothered by compliance. Crocker's madness is the only proof that something was taken from him. So he keeps yelling, not because it works, not because it helps, but because silence would mean agreeing that his childhood never mattered. That's why his life isn't funny when you strip away the sound effects. It's not about fairies. It's about trauma without witnesses, about knowing something precious was stolen and being told your entire life that you imagined it. We laugh because the show tells us to. We laugh because the pain is exaggerated. We laugh because cartoons make suffering feel consequence-free. But Crocker exists at the edge where comedy and horror touch. He is what happens when a world built on denial collides with someone who refuses to forget. A man whose entire identity is shaped by a truth that cannot survive daylight. And that is why it will always, relentlessly, unfairly, profoundly suck to be Mr. Crocker. Because he was right, and being right destroyed him. So the next time you hear that scream, that shrill, desperate, reality-fracturing cry, "Fairy OddParents!" pause for a second. Because behind the joke, behind the exaggerated animation style of the Fairly OddParents, there is a man who never recovered from losing something he was never allowed to grieve. Mr. Crocker isn't funny because he's loud. He's funny because the universe keeps proving him right and punishing him for it. And maybe that's why we keep coming back to characters like him. Because somewhere between the laughter and the cruelty, we recognize something uncomfortably familiar. The fear of knowing the truth too early and paying for it forever. So laugh. You're supposed to. But remember him. And if you enjoyed dissecting the suffering hidden inside nostalgic cartoons, leave a comment. Like the video, subscribe, and tell us which character's life secretly sucks more than we ever realized.